Likutei Sichos Chelek Yud, Sicha Noach Gimel. This is a Rashi Sicha, a very geschmackes Sicha. It's going to discuss why Rashi does not address a specific issue, something that is a very fundamental detail in the story of Noach and the Mabul. The discussion is going to be about the alei zayis, the olive leaf that the Yonah brought back to the Tava. Where did it come from? Where did this alei zayis come from? Seif Aleph, page 30. Meduber kama pa'amim shedarki shel Rashi bepirushi al Torah in levayer kol davar hakosha al derech hapshat bepirush haksuvim. It's been spoken numerous times that it is Rashi's style to address any issue that is difficult according to pshat. And if there's a question which Rashi does not answer, that is the evidence that the reason is self-understood to the extent that Rashi has no need to address it and to explain it. Or that the answer is understood based on something that Rashi addressed earlier that can be applied to here as well. Our parsha tells us that Noach knew that the water had become light, had become diminished from above the ground. By sending the Yonah, the bird, the dove from the Teva. The Yonah came back in evening time. And a leaf of an olive tree is caught in her mouth. And this is how Yonah knew that the water was getting less and less, and soon he'll be able to leave the Teva. Seemingly, this is not understood. It was told in the previous psukim, al dvar mabul, with regards to the mabul, that the wellsprings of the underground were broken open, and the windows of the heavens were opened, and it rained upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. And then the water raged on the earth 150 days. And because of this, that all the flesh, all the living beings, whether it was the birds, the animals, the livestock, died. And all of the existence was obliterated. That was on the earth. It was obliterated from the earth. So based on these psukim, after such a mabul, no tree or no grass remained in its original form. So therefore the question very simply is, where did the Yonah get this leaf from? The trees were destroyed, and the animals were destroyed, and everything that existed must have been destroyed after this incredible rain and flood. Where did the leaf come from? And this question is addressed by many mefarshim. The Ramban and others. Of course, we are asking according to Pshutei Shel Mikra. And Rashi says nothing. And we do not find in Rashi any explanation to address this. Medrash Rabbah brings two opinions about where the olive leaf came from. Aleph, Shehevia ha'ola mishafshushin oy mehara mishcha sheberetz Yisrael, that the bird brought this leaf from shoots, from things that were growing in Eretz Yisrael, or more specifically from Har HaMishcha in Eretz Yisrael. This is two different versions within the Bereishis Rabbah. Ki be'eretz Yisrael yarad mabul. According to this opinion in the Medrash Rabbah, the mabul did not fall in Eretz Yisrael. K'mei shekasov, the Medrash brings a pasuk, Eretz leimetu harahi, the legushma b'yem zaham, a land that is uncleansed, that was not rained upon on a day of anger. And says this, V'loi gushma b'yem zam, refers to the mabul, that during the time of zam, of anger of Hashem, that brought the mabul, loi gushma, Eretz Yisrael was not rained upon. So that's one opinion, that the leaf came from Eretz Yisrael. Beis, the Medrash Rabbah brings another opinion. Sheniftechu l'shari Gan Eden, ve'vias ala misham. The gates of Gan Eden were opened for the bird and for the dove, and she brought the leaf from there. But we're going to say right away that both of these pirushim are not going to be consistent with Pshutei Shel Mikra. We cannot say right away. The Rebbe addresses this saying this can't be the Shita of Rashi, which is Pshutei Shel Mikra. Ki Aleph, number one, Havali Rashi Lefarsham. A pshat like this, Rashi should have explained. If Rashi was telling us that if Rashi was of the opinion that Al Pi Pshutei Shel Mikra, the leaf came from Eretz Yisrael, then Rashi should have said so. Or for the same matter from Gan Eden. Beis, the second reason why this can't be Rashi's approach, Pirushim Elu Einem Al Derech Pshat, these Pirushim do not follow Pshat. They might be Medrash, but they don't follow Pshat, they don't follow the basic understanding of the Psukim. And he's going to explain. He's going to start with the second pshat about Gan Eden, and then go to the first pshat about Eretz Yisrael. Hapirush v'yasi mi Gan Eden. Hine av shegam al derech hapshat muvan shelo yorad mabul b'Gan Eden. Even if we'll say that even according to pshat, it's clear that the mabul didn't fall in Gan Eden. Shari sibas mabul hoysaki rabba ras ha'odam ba'aretz. The reason the mabul came was because the person was increasingly bad on the earth. And the inclination of his thoughts, of the person's thoughts, of the human being's thoughts, is negative all day. And then what happened after that is the earth, the world was destroyed, meaning to say the conduct of the people was destructive. And the world was filled with robbery, which, as Rashi brings, doesn't just mean financial robbery, also means infidelity and inappropriate relationships. So the people of the world were behaving inappropriately. And in Gan Eden, this is not possible. Gan Eden was a place of holiness, so there was clearly no misconduct in Gan Eden. So clearly there was no mabul in Gan Eden, but Mikol Makim, nevertheless, even if you're going to tell me that Al Pi Pshutei Shel Mikra, there's no mabul in Gan Eden, it still doesn't help us with the second part of what happened here. How is it possible that the Yonah entered into Gan Eden and brought from there a olive leaf? Because of the pasuk says clearly, the Eibishter made to rest in the front of Gan Eden, right outside Gan Eden, the Kruvim, and the flame or the blade of a sword that was turning over, that was both sides were sharp, lishmoir, to protect, to watch over the Gan Eden, haknisa leGan Eden, the entrance to Gan Eden, so it's impossible to get in. So how did the bird get into Gan Eden? And the third point, or the second point within this prat of Gan Eden, Kavanas Noach hoisa lireis hakalu hamayim yalpnei adama. The whole intent of Noach was to see if the water lightened up on the land, on the place where the mabul was. What can Noach gain by the bird bringing him a leaf from Gan Eden? There was no mabul there in the first place. So, number one, Rashi says nothing about this. That's a problem. Number two, even if you follow the pshat, so even if we're to accept that the mabul didn't fall in Gan Eden because there was no bad people in Gan Eden, nevertheless, number one, how does the bird get into Gan Eden? Number two, Number two, what does Noach learn by the leaves sprouting in Gan Eden? If there was no mabul there, how does that tell him what's going on in the places where the mabul was? Mitamze, and this same reasoning, efsher loimar gam kipirush abeis. Kipirush abeis means the other pirush, which was brought actually as an aleph from the Medrash, the fact that the mabul fell in Eretz Yisrael. The same reasoning also negates, according to Pshutei Shel Mikra, the reasoning that the mabul didn't fall in Eretz Yisrael. Ma'araya shekalo hamayim me'ala oretz al yedei ze shevia lezayis me'eretz Yisrael shelo yorad ba'mabul. What evidence does Noach have from the fact that there's a leaf coming from Eretz Yisrael if no mabul came in Eretz Yisrael? So how does that teach him anything with regards to the places where the mabul did fall? And even according to the Deya that the mabul did not fall in Eretz Yisrael, certainly some of the waters that fell in the neighboring lands flowed into Eretz Yisrael. So maybe one would think that there still is a lesson that the water is lightening up, because some water did get into Eretz Yisrael. It's nevertheless, it's not a good answer, because it's understood a place that did not have the mabul falling, and also not the opening of the underground wellsprings. It didn't have that much of the strong waters, and not the raging waters or the strength of the waters. And therefore the waters did not penetrate deeply into the depths of the ground. And certainly over there, the water would lighten up, would become less and easier before all the other places. So based on this, Noach would know that the water lightened up in Eretz Yisrael. How would he know that the water lightened up in the rest of the world? So clearly, the Medrash that says that Eretz Yisrael, that the water didn't fall in Eretz Yisrael, that the mabul didn't come in Eretz Yisrael, and that the leaf came from Eretz Yisrael, or the Medrash that says that the leaf came from Gan Eden, does not go well with Pshutei Shel Mikra, because for the main reason that if the mabul didn't fall there, then how would that give Noach the information that the water would have lightened up in the places where the mabul did fall? Now, in Oyez Gimel, he's going to say, before he goes back to the question and answer the original question, where did the Alei Zayis come from? He's going to address this opinion that the mabul didn't fall in Eretz Yisrael, and he's going to say that this opinion is not consistent with Pshutei Shel Mikra. In other words, besides the fact that even if the mabul didn't fall in Eretz Yisrael, it still wouldn't help us to understand where the Alei Zayis came from, because Noach needs a raya that Kalu Amayim Me'ala Oretz, and from Eretz Yisrael there's no raya. Besides for that, the Rebbe in Oyez Gimel is going to address this idea that the mabul didn't fall in Eretz Yisrael, and he's going to say that that is inconsistent with Pshutei Shel Mikra. That's Oyez Gimel. Noisef al zeh, in addition to this, according to Pshutei Shel Mikra, we must say, Asher Yorad HaMabul Be'eretz Yisrael, that the mabul did fall in Eretz Yisrael. Ubahaktim, and let us first preface as follows. The Medrash may be Beis Deyas, Bepirush HaKosov, Chamesh Esrei Abba Milamayla Govru Hamayim Vayechusu Haharim. The Medrash is going to bring two opinions how to interpret the pasuk, where it says, this is pasuk Chaf in Perek Zayin, that the water went 15 amma above, and the mountains were covered. So Rabbi Yehuda says, Chamesh Esrei Amma Bahar, Chamesh Esrei Amma Bebika, which means, literally it means there's 15 ammas in the mountain, 15 ammas in the valley. What Rabbi Yehuda is saying is that whatever the ground level was, the water was 15 amas above it. So if there was a mountain, the water was 15 amas above the mountain. If there was flat ground, the water was 15 amas above the ground. If there was a valley, the water was 15 amas above the valley, which would imply that this was a miracle. Because generally speaking, if you have some water here, some water here, the water from the higher place will flow to the lower place and the water will become leveled. If some parts the water was higher and some parts the water was lower, this is clearly miraculous. This is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Reb Nechemia argues and says, Tesvav Amma Bahar, that on top of the mountain there was 15 Amos, Avol Bebika Kol Shehein, in a valley, it was just whatever it was. Based on the depth of the valley, that's how much water there was. And what Rav Nechemia is saying is that it didn't matter how deep the valley was, the water always was leveled with 15 amas above the highest mountain. Rashi, b'pirushay ala posik. Rashi, in his Pirush, Mefaresh says, Chamesh esrei amma milamayla, 15 amas above. Lamayla shall call goiva golaharim, above the height of all of the mountains. La'achar shehishvu amayim l'rashi harim, after the mountains after the water was leveled out to the height of the mountains. In other words, first the water leveled to the height of the mountains, and then another 15 amas above all the mountains. And this is Kedas Reb Nechemia. So Rashi takes the opinion of Reb Nechemia. Also, the Gemara in Yuma also takes this opinion of Reb Nechemia. Over there, the Gemara asks the question. It's not in the Sikha. This is what the Gemara says. Shuri kaimi. Could water be at different levels? And later in the Ara 20, the Rebbe is going to say, even by Kriyas Yamsuf, there was a ruach kodim aza kol halayla. There was an eastern wind, a strong eastern wind that was holding up the water. But to say that water was on different levels doesn't make sense. The Gemara over there asks another question: how did the Tava travel? If the water is up here and then it's passing a mountain, it's going to flip over. So therefore, the Gemara over there says, "Nifku kol minus tehem rabba ad asfu maya bahadituri," till the water was all equal with the mountains. V'hadar chamesh milmayla gavru amayim. This is from the Gemara in Yuma. So the Gemara in Yuma is also another source for Rashi following the Shita of Rav Nechemia that chamesh esrei milmayla amma milmayla means 15 amas above the highest mountain, and that the water was on an equal level. Now, the reason that Rashi follows this opinion is for 3 points. Aleph, when there's no necessity to say that the Eibishter made a miracle, it's the opposite of Pshutei Shel Mikra to say that there was a nes which the pasuk ignores or doesn't mention. In our case, the das Reb Yehuda hayakan nes gadol. According to Reb Yehuda, there's a huge miracle here that the water didn't flow down from the higher level to the lower level. For a time period of a great amount of time, of 40 days plus 150 days. Which is totally unnatural. Besides the fact that the pasuk doesn't say anything in its paper for us to say, unless there's a hechrech to do so, that there was a nes, and the pasuk doesn't tell us it's a nes shalei l'tzedek. What's the purpose of the miracle? What is gained by the water being in different levels? Base. Another reason why Rashi goes with the Shita of Rav Nechemia, Pashtus Lashon HaKosov, Chamesh esrei ama milamayla, mas milamayla de gave kol ha'arim. He doesn't say Chamesh esrei ama milamayla or Chamesh esrei ama. I guess I don't know what it could have said, but the fact that it does say Chamesh esrei amas milamayla, that it was 50 amas above, and then Vayechusu ha'arim, and the mountains were covered, implies that it was above everything. That it was 15 amas above everything, above all of the mountains. And then we have a third point, mitzat toichen ha'inyan, from the storyline, that is going to clearly imply that the water was 15 amas above the mountains. Above all the water was 15 amas above the mountains, even the areas where there were no mountains. And he has a very beautiful theory here. L'das Lev Nachman, Lev Nechemia, Muva lama nacha teva al hari arara dafka. According to Rav Nechemia, it makes a lot of sense that the teva rested on hari ararat. Even though this caused an extra hardship to Noach, that he had to go down from the mountain back down to the plain land. But it makes sense. Since it was one of the highest mountains, when the water began to go down, the first place that you see land is dry land, or land is the highest land elevation. And therefore, this was the first place that the teva could rest, was on the top of Hari Ararat. And that's where the teva stopped. Because if you have the whole world covered in water, and it starts going down slowly, then wherever there is a high mountain, that'll be the first place where you'll see dry land, and therefore Noach could park the teva over there. But if in every single place the water was the same higher than the land elevation, and now the water began to go down, so everywhere is going down equally. So just like Hari Ararat appeared out of the water, also dry land would also appear out. The plain land would also appear out of the water, because everywhere was going down at the same time in an equal amount, and the water was never level to begin with. So this went down 15 amas till the mountain. This went down 15 amas till the dry land. In that case, why did the teva rest in Hari Ararat? He could have stopped anywhere, because after 15 amas going down, all the land began to appear. This is why Rashi teaches like Rav Nechemia, because according to Rav Nechemia, the fact that the teva parked on Hari Ararat makes much more sense. So now that we have this whole preface about understanding what Chamesh Esrei Amas Milamayla means, and the third nekuda was that because the teva rested on Hari Ararat is a proof that the water was Chamesh Esrei Ama Milamayla, of higher than the highest mountain, equal everywhere. We can now apply the same reasoning to the question of whether the water fell in Eretz Yisrael. If we would say that the Mabul didn't fall in Eretz Yisrael, even if some water flowed in from the other nations, other lands surrounding Eretz Yisrael, obviously the water would have lightened up there more earlier than in the other parts of the world. Why did the Teva park in Harei Ararot and not in Eretz Yisrael, and it could have parked even earlier in Eretz Yisrael? From the fact that the Teva did not park in Eretz Yisrael and it parked Dafke B'Harei Ararot, from this we understand that it must be that also in Eretz Yisrael, Al Pi Psutei Shel Mikra, there was a Mabul, and this is in disagreement with the Medrash, or the Psutei Shel Mikra is inconsistent with the Medrash that says that the Eretz Yisrael Le'yarad Mabul. It's actually interesting, he brings in the Ara 23 that pasuk in Yecheskel that the Medrash brings, V'loi gushma b'yem zam, which the Medrash explained to mean that there was no rain in time of the Mabul. Rashi over there says, Loi is avidu ba'uv din tavim, no good deeds were done there. Rashi does not teach that there was no Mabul there, which makes sense now because according to Psutei Shel Mikra, there was a Mabul there. So that makes more gishmak, the way Rashi teaches the pasuk in Yecheskel, that Loi is avidu ba'uv din tavim, that it means that good deeds weren't done there. So now we're back to our original question. Since the Alei Zayis did not come from Gan Eden, the Alei Zayis certainly didn't come from Eretz Yisrael, because according to Psutei Shel Mikra, there was a Mabul in Eretz Yisrael like everywhere else. So, we are back to our original question: where did the Yaina get an Alei Zayis from to bring to Noach? And in Ois Daled, we're going to ask a number of additional questions that will bring us ultimately to the answer of our initial question. Ois Daled. The Yuvan Bahaktim Eid Dvarim Bilti Muvanim will understand this by first introducing another few details that are not understood, Bepirush HaPasuk Shel Kasav Zeh, in the simple understanding of this pasuk. Aleph. Mavur b'Kasav. Sha'yidei she'ivia es Alei Zayis Yada neyak shekalu hamayim me'al haaretz. Pasuk, it tells us that by the Yaina bringing the leaf, Noach knew that the water was lightening up on the earth. Sha'akavana bazeh. What does it mean, kalu hamayim? Sheyada leirak sha'amayim hayu halich v'chaser. Not just that the water was getting less and less, because this had already occurred some time before. Noach knew that the water was getting less because the Teva had already rested on Harei Ararot. Plus, the very fact that he was sending out a Yaina means that he knew that it wasn't what it initially was. The pasuk says very clearly that the water was drying out on the earth before Yaina sent out the bird. Before Noach sent out the bird. Yaina is the bird. So what does it mean, kalu hamayim? Gam kalu hamayim ad kedei kach shekvar yesh mokim shaka'aver zman kotzer yiyeh monoyach lanuach al haaretz. The water, the earth, was soaked with water. So whether the water was totally down or the earth was still soaked up with water, it was still impossible for Noach to get out of the Teva and rest or live on the actual earth. So he needed to know, hakalu hamayim, is the water diminished enough that we could actually go back out and rest and live on the dry land. So now that I'm trying to figure out not whether the water is going down, because I know that already. I'm trying to figure out if the water went down enough that it's possible to leave the Teva. What proof does he have from a leaf? Maybe this leaf was taken from a tree on a very high on a very high mountain. Especially since the Teva itself was already on a high mountain. And from the top of the tree. And at this height, there's already a lot of water. At this height, there's already a lot of time that there was no water. So there could have been a leaf over there, but how does the leaf that's on the top of a tree, that's on the top of a mountain, tell Noach what's going on the ground? Base. Second question. Why was it an olive leaf? Not any other tree. The pasuk insists on telling us that it was the leaf of an olive tree. Why is it relevant what type of leaf the bird brought? So these are our two questions. Number one, if Noach wants to know what's going on the earth, on the ground, how does a leaf help Noach to know what's happening on the ground? Number two, why is it relevant that it was an olive leaf? V'abir bazeh. So let's explain the answer to these two questions. What did Noach find out from the leaf? And why was it an olive leaf? In numerous places in Chazal, it's explained that the olive tree is a very strong tree. One of the examples is in Tosefta, in Bab Metzia. Over there it's talking about a lost object. What a person is allowed to do when he finds an object, an Aveda, before he returns it, before he finds the owner. So there's certain things that you're allowed to do, certain things you're supposed to do to make sure it's in use. So it's talking about kardumais, about axes. And it says that you're allowed to chop a tree with it, but he shouldn't chop a tnoin or a zayas. A tnoin is I would imagine, a radish, which I don't know how that fits in. But a zayas is an olive tree. So the Tosefta says that you're not allowed to use a found axe to chop an olive tree because the olive trees are so strong that it could damage the axe. So this is one example where you see in halacha that an olive tree is a very strong tree. And this would fit in also according to Pshat. Because in a matter of fact, of reality, we're not going to differentiate between halacha and Pshat. It either is or isn't. So if we're saying that in reality the tree, the zayis tree is a strong tree, then this is consistent with Pshat as well. Additionally, if a child, a ben chamesh lemikra, a student is going to see an olive tree, take if yavchin shechazaku. Right away you look at a tree, you see that it's a very powerful tree, a strong tree. So based on this, one can say that even though the mabul was very strong, we explained before that there was nifku minus tem rabba, and there was 40 days and 40 nights. So we explained before how strong and powerful the mabul was. Nevertheless, being that the zayis tree is a strong tree, from all of the olive trees in the world, we must say that that some of them must have remained. In other words, the zayis tree is strong enough that even through everything that the mabul was, at least some of the zayis trees would survive the mabul. He brings in the order 31 that it says later in the parashas Noach, it says that Noach vayita korem, that Noach planted a vineyard. So Rashi says, how did he have things to plant a vineyard from? He brought in, Rashi says, hichnis imay zmeiros v'yichure te'enim. He brought young vine branches and young date branches or fig branches. A tamar is a date and te'ena is a fig. So te'ena is fig branches. into the Tava with him. Why didn't he bring olive branches with him into the Tava? Because he knew the olive branches would survive. So now we understand that what we're saying now over here, that we are certain that the Zayis trees survived. We now understand why Noach had no need to bring olive branches with him into the Teva. So although we have established that the Zayis trees are so strong that we were sure, confident that they would, at least some of them would survive the Mabul. On the other hand, it's very hard to say that the leaves of the Zayis tree, even though they too are very strong. The Gemara in Gittin, the Tosfos in Gittin talks about using it for a get. So over there it says that it's very strong. It'll last for a very long time. But nevertheless, to think that they survived as they are, to look like a leaf through the whole Mabul, the leaves were covered and soaked in water for a numerous consecutive months. So to say that the leaves survived, that we can't say. So the trees survived, yes. The leaves not. Therefore we must say, so therefore we must say that the leaf that the Yonah brought was a new leaf. That grew after the Mabul. And enough time had passed. Enough time passed since the tree itself wasn't covered in water. And it started to sprout until the leaves grew. And that's what the Yonah brought. So if enough time passed that the tree could begin to sprout its own new fresh leaves, this was enough time for Noach to understand that the water was just about ready, the earth was just about ready for them to go out onto. So this is the answer to the question, how did Noach know from the fact that he brought an alei zayis? This is the answer to the question. How did Noach know from the leaf that the earth was ready? Because since it was a fresh leaf that grew after the Mabul, and enough time must have passed for a leaf to grow. Clearly, enough time has passed to know that Kalu Hamayim Me'al Haaretz. Move on Gamkein Diuk Akasuv Alei Zayis. And this is why the pasuk emphasizes or stresses the fact that it was an olive tree leaf. Because this answers our initial question in the beginning of the Sikha, where did the Yonah get the leaf from? Since the tree is very strong, therefore it survived the Mabul, and therefore right away it began to grow. And that's how, even though it wasn't in Eretz Yisrael and it wasn't in Gan Eden, it was just in the regular place, and nevertheless he was able to get a leaf because it grew on a tree that survived the Mabul. And according to this, it's also answered Gamkein Hada Yesh Lahakshis. How did Noach know from a leaf that it was growing on a tree, and because of that he could learn Kalu Hamayim? Maybe he just found a leaf, the Yonah found a leaf floating on the water. But according to the above, that this is a leaf that grew after the Mabul, it's clear, it's very obvious that you could tell the difference between a leaf that was sitting underwater, soaking in water for almost a year, to a leaf that just grew. So when Noach saw the leaf, he knew that it had just grown. How do we know that? Because it was an Ali Zayis, and a Zayis could survive the Mabul, and therefore Noach knew that it was a fresh leaf. And because Noach knew it was a fresh leaf, he knew that Kalu Amayim Me'al Haaretz. And this answers, answered all of our questions. And our last two questions were, how did Noach know from the fact that it was on top of a tree that the earth is ready? And the answer is because the leaf had just grown. The other question is, why does the pasuk say Alei Zayis? Because he wants to tell us where Noach got the leaf from, where the Yoina got the leaf from. He got the leaf from the Zayis tree, which could survive a Mabul. And this also answers our question from the beginning of the Sikha. Where did the Yoina get the leaf from? He got it from a Zayis tree. And the Zayis tree survived the Mabul. And as soon as the water started going down, it began to sprout new leaves. To strengthen this point, we're going to go into Eis Hey. We're going to learn another Rashi. If you remember right in the beginning of the Sikha, he said that sometimes either Rashi thinks it doesn't need to be explained, or Rashi is relying on something else that was explained. So in Eis Hey, he's going to teach us from the Rashi on the words V'hine alei zayis taraf b'fiyah, a proof to this understanding that the Yoina took the leaf that had just grown from the Zayis tree. And to make this even stronger, more gishmak, even a child, he'll see an olive zayis, an olive leaf, and he'll understand how strong it is. It is the way of Rashi usually, to explain everything very clearly. Rashi should have said something that Elon Zayis is very strong, as we just explained at length. Rashi ignores the whole thing. He doesn't mention the Elon Zayis is chazak, and he doesn't mention that that the leaf was a new leaf. He doesn't say anything. He ignores it. Why? And how are we supposed to know all this? According to Rashi, it's very clear in the pasuk that this was a fresh leaf and that it came from the Zayis tree. Where the pasuk says, "V'hine alei Zayis taraf b'fiyah." Pirush Rashi, taraf chataf. He grabbed it. That the bird grabbed. The word taraf usually is like a word treifa, which usually refers to the animals in the wild that are toirif, that attack other animals. So it's a very unusual word to use the word tarif. And many mefarshei Chumash address, in order 36, he brings from the Re'im, he brings from Targum Unkulus, he brings from the Balei HaTosfos, there's the Riva, there's many mefarshim that discuss the word tarif, what it means or why it was used. Rashi teaches the word chataf, just like an animal attacks another animal, grabs him. So too here the bird, the Yoina, grabbed the leaf off the tree. Ein Rashi mefarish tevas tarif be'efen acher. Rashi doesn't teach in any other way as many of the other mefarshim do. Lefi shapirus zeh masim yisrael derech hapshat. Because this pirus, the pirus chataf, that he grabbed the leaf, that is the most consistent with the way of pshat. Hainu she'akosuf madgish shechatfa ha'olam min ha'ilan. The pasuk is emphasizing that she had to grab the leaf from the tree. The lechera avle leimar v'hinei alei zayis b'fiyah. Pasuk could have said, we saw Noach, and Noach saw the Yoina, and behold, there's an olive leaf in her mouth. Why does he have to say Tarif b'fiyah? Ve'abir, Aleph, ha'ole nilkech mimakim gidulei, lo shayatzaf al pnei hamayim v'kayetze b'zeh. Number one, the leaf was taken from, it was plucked from where it grew, not picked up, floating on the water. Beis lekichas alei zayis me'ilan shalai, taking a leaf from an olive tree. Nikras chotaf is called grabbing. Ki al yedei chatifa davka b'chayzik. Because it's only by grabbing it very strongly that you can get the leaf. Ki ilan chazaku, because a zayis is a strong ilan. So according to Pshutei Shel Mikra, that the ilan was an ilan zayis, which is an ilan chazak, and the Yena took a leaf that just grew. That's why Rashi says Toroif Chotaf, that he grabbed it, because it was an Elon Zayis and it was a fresh leaf that was being plucked from the place that it grew. And based on that, now that Rashi teaches Toroif Chotaf, now I know that it was a strong, that the Elon Zayis is strong, and that it was a new leaf, and therefore when it comes to the pasuk over here, that Rashi has no reason to explain anything, because everything is self-understood based on the Rashi, Toref Chotaf. Beautiful. So now everything is answered. However, we're going to go into one more nekuda that's not directly related to this detail of the story, but it is somewhat related based on what we said earlier. Now, Izvavi starts with Al Pi Hanal. I wasn't 100% sure what the Al Pi Hanal, which Hanal is referring to, but L'Cha'era, he's referring mostly to the discussion we had earlier about whether the Mabul was in Eretz Yisrael. And the idea that a nes does not occur, that the pasuk, it's heipech pastos aksuvim, it's inconsistent with Pshutei Shel Mikra, that there should be a nes that the pasuk doesn't talk about. And based on that, we can understand another Rashi in this parsha. Al pi hanal, based on what we learned earlier, that it's heipech pastos aksuvim, it's inconsistent with Pshutei Shel Mikra, that unless there's a hechrech, unless there's a need to say, a necessity to say that a nes occurred and the pasuk doesn't mention it. Based on this, Yumtek Eidin Pirush Rashi, there's another element, another detail in Rashi that will be understood in a more gishmaka way. Ala pasuk vayasheku hamoyim, on the pasuk a little bit earlier, the beginning of this Perek, yeah? Pasuk Aleph, the end of Pasuk Aleph in Perek Ches, vayasheku hamoyim, Pirush Rashi, K'moy kishoich chamas hamelach. The words vayasheku, which means the water is calmed, it comes from the same words, it's in the same Shoydish as in the Megillah where it says kishoich chamas hamelach, that the anger of the king was calmed. And Rashi explains lashon anachas cheba, the lashon of calming or abating anger. Pisha Mefarshim, the Mefarshim explain shemekayre shel Rashi u'me'amavur bizvachim. Rashi's makar comes from the Gemara in Zvachim. The Gemara in Zvachim is actually discussing whether the Mabul took place in Eretz Yisrael. And it's a machlokes between Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Over there, Rish Lakish brings a pasuk. It says, Mikoyel asher b'charav mesu. And they're asking, the Gemara asks, where are the dead people? The dead people from Nebuchadnezzar, where the dead people from Eretz Yisrael. So Rish Lakish says to Rabbi Yochanan, it says, Mikoyel asher b'charav mesu, that everything died. According to you, says Rish Lakish to Rabbi Yochanan, that there was no Mabul in Eretz Yisrael. Amai mesu, why did they die? Why couldn't they survive in Eretz Yisrael? So the Gemara answers, Mishum Havla. They didn't die from drowning. They died from the heat of the water. Kidder Rav Chisda. The Amar Rav Chisda said, Beroischin kilkilu. They sinned with warmth, which is referring to the taivas. When the Yetzer Hara is heated up to fulfill a taiva. So they sinned with heat. And therefore they were punished with heat. And the Gemara brings a raya, because here by the Mabul it says Vayashoku Amayim, Uchsiv Hasa Mechamas Hamelech Shachacha, and it says in the Megillah Mechamas Hamelech Shachacha. So we see that Chamas, that Shachacha goes with Chamas, with heat, and therefore is a raya that Vayashoku Amayim means that the heat of the water lessened. That's what the Gemara says in Zvachim. Say the Mefarshim that this is what Rashi is talking about. That the Gemara in Zvachim is saying that Vayashoku Amayim teaches us that the heat of the water calmed down. And that's what Rashi is saying over here, Vayashoku Lashon K'mei K'sheichem Asamelech. We'll say it inside. A Pirshom Mefarshim, Shemekeri Shalashim Mavur Bezvachim, Bereizchen Kilkulo, Bereizchen Edenu, Dichsivacha Vayashoku Amayim, Chsivasam, V'chama Asamelech Shachacha. It's interesting that the Rebbe in the Sikha quotes a girsa in Rashi that is consistent with the Gemara. And Punkt the Chumash I have over here, which is obviously not a raya to anything, but Punkt actually has Kesheich Chamas HaMelech and not V'chamas HaMelech Shachacha. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I made a mistake. Rashi says Kishay Chamas HaMelech. The Gemara says V'chamas HaMelech Shachacha. So a separate question that could be asked is why Rashi quotes a different pasuk than the Gemara in Zvachim. Aval im kavanas Rashi kanal. If Rashi's kavana was to follow the Gemara in Zvachim, that the water was hot and Vayashoku Amayim means that the water cooled down. Then there are differences between Rashi and the Gemara that are not understood to us. Aleph, the Gemara says clearly that the water was hot. Rashi doesn't mention the fact that the water was hot. Seemingly, that's the main point here. Rashi doesn't mention it. If the Gemara has to say, bring a raya that Vayashoku means that the water was hot, the Gemara is not pshuta shel mikra. If the Gemara feels the need to explain it, for sure Rashi should have explained it. Beis Rashi Mosef Lashon Hanachas Chema. Rashi adds the words Hanachas Chema, which means the abating or the calming of the anger, which is something that the Gemara didn't mention. In the Raya, he brings the pasuk in the V'chamas HaMelech Shachacha. But in the description of what happened by the Mabul, there's no mention of anger. And Rashi says Hanachas Chema. Therefore, we understand that Rashi's makir is not zvachim. And Rashi is not indicating that the water was hot. Vayashoku means the calming and the quieting of the anger. And not heat. That it slowed down or calmed down the surging of the waters. And according to Rashi, the water was not boiling. It was regular water. Okay. So, another Rashi was brought in, Vayashoku Amayim. There are Mefarshi Rashi that want to say that based on this Rashi is referencing the Gemara in Zvachim, and because of that it means that the water was hot. And according to that, we have two questions. Number one, why does Rashi not mention that the water was hot? Number two, why does Rashi add the words Hanachas Chema, and which the Gemara doesn't have, and therefore Rashi is not basing his pshat on the Gemara in Zvachim, and Rashi does not hold that al pi pshuta shel mikra the water was hot. And what he means to say is Vayashoku Amayim, that the surging, the strength of the water was calmed down, the anger of the water, the fury of the water rather, calmed down, and that's what it means Vayashoku Amayim. How do we get to this? Besides the fact that these questions are real questions, There's another nekuda which we learned earlier in the Sikha that helps us reach this conclusion. What's the reason of Rashi that Rashi holds not like the Gemara, but that the water was not hot? There's no necessity in Psutei Shel Mikra to add a miracle that the water was hot. According to Psutei Shel Mikra, like we said earlier in the Gemara about the different levels of the water, how did the Tava travel in different levels? We have the same question. How did the Tava survive in boiling water? As wonderful as the wood was, if you boil water, it's going to affect the Tava. So, in other words, first of all, b'chlal, there's no hechrech to make this nes. Not only is the nes that the water was hot, but the fact that the teva would survive in hot water would be even a bigger nes. And based on what we said earlier in the Sikha, that we try not to be meisif a nes unless there's no hechrech, therefore Rashi says, I don't want to be meisif another nes here, that the water was hot. And therefore Rashi does not follow the Shittas Gemara because that would be have to add another nes, and then have to add a triple nes, that the teva could survive in mayim roischin, and therefore Rashi has a different pshat that vayasheku amayim means that the water was that the surging of the water calmed, and not that the heat of the water cooled off. And this also answers a question which is discussed in the Farshim and in Ara 44, how did Oig survive the hot water? And there's other explanations, but according to this, it's not a question because the water wasn't hot. So very quickly, we started out asking a question. Where did the Yaina get the Alei Zayis from? We tried to suggest that it's from, the Medrash says it's from Eretz Yisrael or from the Gan Eden. We said that won't work with Psutei Shel Mikra because it wouldn't have helped Yaina. It wouldn't have helped Yaina know anything from if there was no Mabul there. Then what does it help Yaina? Besides, where would he even get it from? And besides, number two, according to Psutei Shel Mikra, the Mabul clearly did end up in Eretz Yisrael, because why would there be a nest that we don't know about, that the pasuk doesn't tell us about, and why would the Teva park on Harei Ararot and not in Eretz Yisrael if there was no Mabul there? So to answer the question of where did Alei Zayis come from, we asked the question, how did Noach know that Kalu Amayim, and why Davka Alei Zayis? And we explained that the Zaysim trees survived the Mabul, and therefore after the Mabul finished, they were able to start growing leaves right away, and that's how Noach knew that enough time passed, that Kalu Amayim Al Aretz, and that's why it has to be an Alei Zayis, because only they are strong enough to survive the Mabul. And that's why it says, Taraf, Chotaf, that's what Rashi teaches Chotaf, and had to grab it strongly because it was a fresh leaf that had just grown, and it was coming off of a very strong tree, and that's how we know, even according to Psutei Shel Mikra, that we're talking about something that grew after the Mabul, and that the tree is very strong. And then in the last ois, we also explained that Vayasheku Amoyim means not that the water was hot, but that the water calmed down. And after such a beautiful, beautiful understanding and dissection of the psukim and understanding it now so beautifully, we cannot end without a Yena Shel Teda. So we have Oy Zayin me Yena Shel Teda Shebinyan Anal, the Yena Shel Teda on this Inyan. This bar b'Teda is explained in Teda Betam Lama Nikra Mabul Benovi Mein Noach. Why is the Mabul called the water of Noach? Avshe and Yonei Shel Noach Hayat Salam in a Mabul v'Afacha, even though Noach's role was to save the people from the Mabul, and the opposite of the Mabul. So the Teda explains Shubchinas Mayim, because the Mabul was the idea of water, which purifies those that are tamei. Similar to a mikveh that's made up of 40 saw, that's matayr the tamei. And therefore the Mabul came to purify the world, and it went for 40 days and 40 nights, connected the Memsa. And therefore it's called the waters of Noach, because Noach means a nachas ruach or a naicha derucha, and from this tara that came about from the Mabul, it caused a naicha derucha to the Eibishter. The Gam, in Neach's role was to reestablish the world in a good and tahir way, which is similar to the Mabul, which was purifying the world. So therefore, the reason why the Mabul is called Mei Noach is because the Tara brought Naicha Derucha, it brought a peace to Hashem, a Nachas Ruach to Hashem, and also because Noach was reestablishing the world in a better way. And according to the rule that every descent, every step back is for the purpose of a greater ascent, it's clear, it's understood that the world was not just purified from its previous state of tumah, and was restored to its original state. Rather, a new Tara was given because of the Mabul. The mikveh, which we find this parallel in mikveh as well. When a person goes to the mikveh, it doesn't just purify the person from the past tumah, but it lifts him up to a higher level of Tara. So if the uftu of the Mabul was that it added a Tara Yeseda to the world, so based on this we can understand how special it is, according to those who say that the Mabul fell even in Eretz Yisrael. An extra kedusha and Tara was added to Eretz Yisrael in comparison to its previous level. So not only the whole world received the extra Tara, but if you say that the Mabul took place in Eretz Yisrael, then also Eretz Yisrael received an extra Tara. And that's one of the beautiful things about saying that the Mabul did fall in Eretz Yisrael, that after the Mabul fell, a new Tara and a new Kedusha was given to Eretz Yisrael.